This reading is of an article published in the Harvard Business Review at the end of 1958. The article itself is known for introducing the term information technology into the academic literature. Management in the 1980s, published in the November-December issue of the Harvard Business Review in 1958. Written by Harold J. Leavitt and Thomas L. Whistler. Over the last decade, a new technology has begun to take hold in American business, one so new that its significance is still difficult to evaluate. While many aspects of this technology are uncertain, it seems clear that it will move into the managerial scene rapidly, definite and far-reaching impact on managerial organisation. In this article, we would like to speculate about these effects, especially as they apply to medium-sized and large business firms of the future. The new technology does not yet have a single established name. We shall call it information technology. It is composed of several related parts. One includes techniques for processing of information rapidly, and it is epitomised by the high-speed computer. A second part centres around the application of statistical and mathematical methods to decision-making problems. It is represented by techniques like mathematical programming and by methodologies like operations research. A third part is in the offing, though its applications have not emerged very clearly. It consists of the simulation of higher order thinking through computer programs. Information technology is likely to have its greatest impact on middle and top management. In many instances, it will lead to opposite conclusions from those stated by the currently philosophy of participative management. Broadly, our prognostications are along the following lines. 1. Information technology should move the boundary between planning and performance upward. Just as planning was taken from the hourly worker and given to the industrial engineer, we now expect it to be taken from a number of middle managers and given to as yet largely non-existent specialists, operations researchers perhaps, or organisational analysts. Today's middle management level will become highly structured. Much more of the work will be programmed, that is, covered by sets of operating rules governing the day-to-day decisions that are made. 2. Correlately, we predict that large industrial organisations will re-centralise, that top managers will take on an even larger proportion of the innovating, planning and other creative functions than they have now. 3. A radical reorganisation of middle management roles should occur, with certain classes of middle management jobs moving downward in status and compensation, because they will require less autonomy and skill, while others move upward into the top management group. 4. We suggest too that the line separating the top from the middle of the organisation will be drawn more clearly and impenetrably than ever, much like the line drawn in the last few decades between hourly workers and first-line supervisors. The new technology. Information technology has diverse roots, with contributions from such disparate groups as sociologists and electrical engineers. Working independently from many disciplines have been about problems that have turned out to be closely related and cross-fertilizing. Cases in point are the engineer's development of servo mechanisms and the related developments of general cybernetics and information theory. These ideas from the hard sciences all had a direct bearing on problems of processing information, in particular the development of techniques for conceptualizing and measuring information. Related ideas have also emerged from other disciplines. The mathematical economist came along with game theory, a means of ordering and permitting analysis of strategies and tactics in purely competitive think-type games. Operations research fits in here. OR people made use of mathematical concepts or devised their own for solving multivariate problems without necessarily worrying about the particular cost of the variables. And from social psychology, ideas about communication structures in groups began to emerge, followed by ideas about thinking and general problem-solving processes. These developments and many others from even more diverse sources have in common a concern about the systematic manipulation of information in individuals or machines. The relationships among the ideas are not yet clear. Has the wheat been adequately separated from the chaff? It is hard to tell who started what preceded what, and which is method, and which theory. But characteristically, application has not and will not in the future wait on contemplation of basic research. Distinctive features. We information technology new because one did not see much use of it until World War II, and it did not become clearly visible in industry until a decade later. New also in that it can be differentiated at least two earlier industrial technologies. One, in the first 2 decades of this century, Frederick W. Taylor's scientific management constituted a new and influential technology, one that took a large part in shaping the design of industrial organisations. 2. Largely, after World War II, a second distinct technology, participative management, seriously overtook and even partially displaced scientific management. Notions about decentralization, morale, and human relations modified and sometimes reversed earlier applications of scientific management. Individual incentives, for example, were treated first as simple applications of Taylorism, but they have more recently been revised in the light of participative ideas. The scientific and participative varieties both survived. One reason is that scientific management concentrated on the hourly worker, while participative management has generally aimed at one level higher, at middle management, so they have not conflicted. What happens now? The new information technology has direct implications for middle management as well as top management. Current picture. The inroads made by technology are already apparent, so that our predictions are more extrapolation than derivations. But the significance of the new trends has been obscured by the wave of interest in participative management and decentralisation. Information technology seems now to show itself mostly in the periphery of management. Its applications appear to be independent of central organisational issues like communication and creativity. We have tended until now to use little pieces of the new technology to generate information or to lay down limits for subtasks that can then be used within the old structural framework. Some of this sparing use of information technology may be due to the fact that those of us with a large commitment to participative management have cause to resist the central implications of the new techniques. But the implications are becoming harder to deny. Many business decisions once made judgmentally now can be made better by following some simple routines devised by a staff man whose company experience is slight, whose position on the organisation chart is still unclear, and whose skill, if any, in human relations was picked up on the playground. For example, we have heard recently of an electrical utility which is considering a move to take away from generating station managers virtually all responsibility for deciding when to use standby generating capacity. A typical decision facing such managers develops on hot summer afternoons. In anticipation of heavy home air conditioning demand at the close of working hours, the manager may put on extra capacity in late afternoon. This results in additional costs such as overtime premiums. In this particular geographical area, rapid moving cold fronts are frequent. Should such a front arrive after the commitment to add capacity is made, losses are substantial. If the front fails to arrive and capacity has not been added, power must be purchased from an adjacent system at penalty rates. Again, result losses. Decisions may soon be made centrally by individuals whose technical skills are in mathematical computer programming with absolutely no experience in generating stations. Rapid spread. We believe that information technology will spread rapidly. One important reason for expecting fast changes in current practices is that information technology will make centralisation much easier. By permitting more information to be organised more simply and processed more rapidly, it will in effect extend the thinking range of individuals. It will allow the top level of management intelligently to categorise, digest and act on a wider range of problems. Moreover, by quantifying more information, it will extend top management's control of the decision processes of subordinates. If centralisation becomes easier to implement, managers will probably revert to it. Decentralisation has, after all, been largely negatively motivated. Top managers act into it because they have been unable to keep up with size and technology. They could not design and maintain the huge and complex communication systems that large centralised organisations needed. Information technology should make re-centralisation possible. It may also obviate other major reasons for centralisation. For example, speed and flexibility will be possible to large size, and top executives will be less dependent on subordinates because there will be fewer experience and areas in which the junior men have more knowledge. In addition, more efficient information processing techniques can be expected to shorten radically the feedback loop that tests the accuracy of observations and decisions. Some of the psychological reasons for decentralisation may remain as compelling as ever. For instance, decentralised organisations probably provide good training ground for the top manager. They make better use of whole man. They encourage more active cooperation. But though interest in these advantages should be very great indeed, it will be counterbalanced by interest in the possibilities of effective top management control over the work done by the mid echelons. Here, an analogy to Taylorism seems appropriate. In perspective and counting the counter trends instigated by participative management, the upshot of Taylorism seems to have been the separating of the hourly worker from the rest of the organisation, and the acceptance by both management and the worker of the idea that the worker need not plan and create. Whether it is psychologically or socially justifiable or not, his creativity and ingenuity are left largely to be acted out of the job, his home or his community. One reason, then, that we expect top acceptance of information technology is its implicit promise to allow the top to control, just as Taylorism the middle to control the bottom. There are other reasons for expecting fast changes. Information technology promises to allow fewer people to do more work. The more it can reach the number of middle managers, the more top managers are willing to try it. We have not mentioned what may well be the most common of all, the pressure on management to cope with increasingly complicated engineering, logistics, and marketing problems. The temporal distance between the discovery of new knowledge and its practical application has been shrinking rapidly, perhaps at a geometric rate. The pressure to reorganise in order to decomplicating, speeding the world should become very great in the next decade. Improvisations and adjustments within present organisational frameworks are likely to prove quite inadequate. Radically thinking of organisational ideas is to be expected. Revolutionary effects. Speculating a little more, one can imagine some radical effects of an accelerating development of information technology, effects warranting the adjective revolutionary. Within the organisation, for example, many middle management jobs may change in a manner reminiscent of, but faster than, the transition from maker to setter, from old-time craftsman to today's hourly worker. As we have drawn an organisational class line between the hourly worker and the foreman, we may expect a new line to be drawn heavily between top management and middle management, with some vice presidents and many ambitious suburban junior executives falling on the lower side. In one respect, the picture we might paint of the 1980s bears a strong resemblance to the organisations of certain societies. For example, to the family-dominated organisations of Italy and other parts of Europe, and even to a small number of such firms in our own country. There will be many fewer middle managers, and most of those who remain are likely to be routine technicians rather than thinkers. This similarity is superficial, of course, for the changes we forecast here will be generated from quite different origins. What organisational and social problems are likely to come up as byproducts of such changes? One can imagine major psychological problems arising from depersonalisation of relationships within management and the greater distance between people at different levels. Major resistances should be expected in the process of converting relatively autonomous and unprogrammed middle management jobs to highly routinized programs. These problems may be of the same order as some of those that were influential in the development of the American unions and in focusing middle management's interest on techniques for overcoming the hourly workers' resistance to change. This time, it will be the top executives directly concerned, and the problems of resistance to change will occur among those middle managers who are programmed with their autonomy, perhaps out of current status in the company, and possibly even out of their jobs. On a broader social scale, one can conceive of large problems outside the firm that affect many institutions' ancillary industry. Thus, what about education for management? How do we educate people for routinized middle management jobs, especially the path from those jobs up to top management gets much rockier? To what extent do business schools stop training specialists and start training generalists to move directly into top management? To what extent do schools start training new kinds of specialists? What happens to the traditional apprentice system of training within managerial ranks? What happens to the traditional apprentice system of training within managerial ranks? What will happen to American class structure? Do we end up with a new Do we end up with a new kind of managerial elite? Will technical knowledge be the main criterion for membership? Will technical knowledge become obsolete so fast that managers themselves will become obsolete within the time span of their industrial career? Will management changes? Some jobs in industrial organisations are more programmed than others. The job that has been subjected to micro-motion analysis, for instance, has been highly programmed. Rules about what is to be done, in what order, and by what processes are all specified. Characteristically, the jobs of today's hourly work tend to be highly programmed and of Taylorism. Conversely, the jobs shown at the tops of organisation charts are often largely unprogrammed. They are think jobs, hard to define and describe operationally. Jobs that appear in the big middle area of the organisation chart tend to be programmed in part, with some specific rules to be followed, but with varying amounts of room for judgment and autonomy. One major effect of information technology is likely to be intensive programming of many jobs now held by middle managers and the concomitant deprogramming of others. As organisations have proliferated in size and specialisation, the problem of control and integration of supervision and skills has become increasingly worrisome. The best answer until now has been participative management. But information technology promises better answers. It promises to eliminate the risk of less than adequate decisions arising from garbled communication, from misconceptions of goals, and from unsatisfactory measurement of partial contributions on the part of dozens of line and staff specialists. Good illustrations of this programming process are not common in middle management, but they do exist, mostly on the production side of the business. For example, the programmers have had some success in displacing the judgment and experience of production schedulers, although the scheduler is still likely to be there to act out the routine, and in displacing the weekly scheduling meetings of production, sales, and supply people. Programs are also being worked out in increasing numbers to decisions about product mixes, warehousing, capital budgeting, and so forth. Predicting the impact. We have noted that not all middle management jobs will be affected alike by the new technology. What kinds of jobs will be more routinized and what kinds less? What factors will make the difference? The impact of change is likely to be determined by 3 criteria. 1. Ease of management. 1. Ease of measurement. It is easier at this stage to apply the new technology. 1. Ease of measurement. It is easier at this stage to apply the new techniques to jobs in and around production than in, say, labour relations. One reason being that quantitative measurement is easier in the former realms. 2. Economic pressure. Jobs that call for big money decisions will tend to get earlier investment in laboratory programming than others. 3. The acceptability of programming by the present job holder. For some class of job people, the advent of impersonal rules may offer protection or relief from frustration. We recently heard of efforts to program a maintenance foreman's decisions by providing rules for allocating priorities in maintenance and emergency repairs. The foreman supported this fully. He was a harried and much blamed man, and programming promised relief. Such as should accelerate the use of programming in certain areas. So should the great interest and activity in the new techniques now apparent in academic and research settings. New journals are appearing, and new societies are springing up, like the Operations Research Society of America, established in 1946, and the Institute of Management Sciences, established in 1954, both of which publish journals. The number of mathematicians and economic analysts who are being taken into industry is impressive, as is the development within industry, often on the personal staffs of top management, of individuals or groups with new labels like operations researchers, organisation analysts, or simply sole assistants for planning. These new people cue to the emergence of information technology. Just as programming the operations of our workers created the industrial engineer, so should information technology, as planning is withdrawn from middle levels, create new planners with new names at the top. So much for work becoming more routinized. At least classes of middle jobs should move upward towards deprogrammedness. 1. The programmers themselves. The new information engineers should move up. They should appear increasingly in staff roles close to the top. 2. We would also expect jobs in research and development to go in that direction, for innovation and creativity will become increasingly important to top management. The rate of obsolescence of things and of information increases. Application of new techniques to scanning and analysing the business environment is bound to increase the range and number of possibilities for profitable production. Competition between firms should centre more and more around their capacities to innovate. Thus, in effect, we think that the horizontal slice of the current organisation chart, the middle management, will break in two, with the larger portion shrinking and sinking into a more highly programmed state, and the smaller portion proliferating and rising to a level where more creative thinking is needed. There seem to be signs that such a split is already occurring. The growth of literature on the organisation of research activities in industry is one indication. Many social scientists and industrial research managers, as well as some general managers, are worrying more and more about problems of creativity and authority in industrial research organisations. Even some highly conservative company presidents have been forced to break time-honoured policies, such as the one relating salary and status to organisational rank, in dealing with their researchers. Individual problems. As the programming idea grows, some old human relations problems may be redefined. Redefinition will necessarily solve the problems, but it may obviate some and give new priorities to others. Thus, the issue of morale versus productivity that now worries us may pale as programming moves in. The morale of programmed personnel may be of less central concern because less, or at least a different sort of activity, will be demanded of them. The execution of controllable routine acts does not require great enthusiasm by the actors. Another current issue may also take a new form: the debate about the social advantages or disadvantages of conformity. The stereotype of the conforming junior executive, more interested in being well liked than in working, should become far less significant in a highly depersonalised, highly programmed, and more machine middle management world. Of course, the pressures to conform will in one sense become more intense, for the individual will be required to stay within the limits of the routines that are set for him. But the constant behavioural pressure to be a good guy, to get along, will have less reason for existence. As individualism, our suspicion is that the average middle manager will have to satisfy his personal needs and aspirations off the job, largely as we have forced the hourly worker to do. In this case, the park forest of the future may be an even more interesting fun than it is now. Changes at the top. If the new technology tends to split middle management, thin it, simplify it, program it, and create a large part of it more rigorously from the top, what compensatory changes might one expect within the top group? This is a much harder question to answer. We can get top will focus even more intently on horizon problems, on problems of innovation and change. We can forecast too that in dealing with such problems, the top will continue for a while to fly by the seat of its pants, that it will remain largely unprogrammed. But even this is quite uncertain. Current research on the machine simulation of high mental processes suggests that we will be able to program the top job before too many decades past. There is good authority for the prediction that within 10 years a digital computer will be the world's chess champion, and that another will discover and prove an important new mathematical theorem, and that in a somewhat more distant future the way is open to scientific with ill-structured problems to make the computer coextensive with the human mind. Meanwhile, we expect top management to become more abstract, more search and research oriented, and corresponding directly involved in the making of routine decisions. Alan New recently suggested to one of the authors that the wave of top management game playing may be one manifestation of such change. Top management of the 1980s may indeed spend a good deal of money and time playing games, trying to simulate its own behaviour in hypothetical future environments. Room for innovators. As the work of the middle manager is programmed, the top manager should be free more than ever from internal detail. But the top will not only be forced to think, it will be forced to think. We doubt that many large companies in the 1980s will be able to survive for even a decade without major changes in products, methods, or internal organisation. The rate of obsolescence and the atmosphere of continuous change, which now characterise industries like chemicals and pharmaceuticals, should spread rapidly to other industries, pressuring them toward rapid technical and organisational change. These ideas lead one to expect that researchers, or people like researchers, will sit closer to the top floor of American companies in larger numbers, and that highly creative people will be more sought after and more highly valued than at present. Since researchers may be as interested in technical problems and professional affiliations as in progress up the organisational ladder, we might expect more impersonal, problem-oriented behaviour at the top, with less emphasis on loyalty to the firm and more on relatively rational concern with solving difficult problems. Again, top staff people may follow their problems from firm to firm much more closely than they do now, so that ideas of executive turnover and compensation may change, along with ideas about tying people down with pension plans. Higher turnover at this level may prove advantageous to companies, for innovators can burn out fast. We may see more brain picking, which is now supposedly characteristic of Madison Avenue. At this creating and innovating level, all the current work on organisation and communication research groups may find its payoff. Besides innovators and creators, new top management bodies will need programmers who will focus on the internal organisation itself. These will be the operations researchers, mathematical programmers, computer experts, and the like. It is not clear where these kinds of people are being located on organisation charts today, but our guess is that the programmer will find a place close to the top. He will probably remain relatively free to innovate and to carry out his own applied research on what and how to program, although eventually into using some stable repertoire of techniques, as has the industrial engineer. Innovators and programmers will need to be supplemented by committers. Committers are people who take on the role of approving or vetoing decisions. They will commit the organisation's resources to a particular course of action, the course chosen from some alternatives provided by innovators and programmers. The current notion that managers ought to be coordinators should flower in the 1980s, but at the top rather than the middle, and the people to be coordinated will be top staff groups. Tight little oligarchy. We says that the groupthink which is frightening some people today will be a commonplace in top management future. For while the innovators and the programmers maintain or even increase their autonomy, and while the committer may be more independent than ever of lower line levels, the interdependence of the top staff oligarchy should increase with the increasing complexity of their tasks. The committer may be forced increasingly to have the top men operate as a committee, which would mean that precise individual the committer may be forced increasingly to have the top men operate as a committee, which would mean that the precise individual locus of decision may become even more obscure than it is today. The small group of psychologists, the researchers on creativity, the clinicians, all should find a surfeit of work at that level. Our references to oligarchy at the top may be misleading. There is no reason to believe that the absolute numbers of creative research people or programmers will shrink. If anything, the reverse will be true. It is the head men in these areas who will probably operate as a little oligarchy, with subgroups and subgroups of researchers and programmers reporting to them. But the optimal structural shape of these unprogrammed groups will not necessarily be pyramidal, pyramidal. It is more likely to be shifting and somewhat amorphous. And it is more likely to be shifting and somewhat amorphous, while the operating programmed portions of the structure ought to be more clearly pyramidal than ever. The organisation chart of the future may look something like a football balanced upon the point of a church bell. Within the football, the top staff organisation, problems of coordination, individual autonomy, group decision-making and so on should arise intensely than ever. We expect they will be dealt with quite independently of the portion of the company, with distinctly different methods of remuneration, control, and communication. Changes in practice. Changes in practices. With the emergence of information technology, radical changes in certain administrative practices may also be expected. Without attempting to present the for the statements, we list a few changes that we foresee. With the organisation of management into corps, supervisors, programmers, creators, committers, multiple entry points into the organisation will become increasingly common. Multiple sources of potential managers will develop, with training institutions outside the firm specialising along the line of of the new organisational structure. Apprenticeship as a basis for training managers will be used less, and apprenticeship as a basis for training managers will be used less and less, since movement up through the line will become increasingly unlikely. Top management training will be taken over increasingly by universities, with on-the-job training done through jobs like that of assistant to a senior executive. Appraisal of higher management performance will be handled through some devices little used at present, such as evaluation bodies. Appraisal of the new middle managers will become much more precise than rating techniques make possible. Development of new methods attaching specific values to input-output parameters. Individual compensation for top staff groups will be more strongly influenced by market forces than ever before, given the increased ability of all kinds of managers. With the new organisational structure, new kinds of compensation practices such as team bonuses will appear. Immediate measures. If the probability seems high that some of our predictions are correct, what can businessmen do to prepare for them? A number of steps are inexpensive and relatively easy. Managers can, for example, explore these areas. 1. They can locate and work up closer liaison with appropriate research organisations, academic and otherwise, just as many companies have profited from similar relationships in connection with the physical sciences. 2. They can re-examine their own organisations for lost information technologies. Many companies undoubtedly have such people, but not all of the top executives seem to know it. 3. They can make an early study and reassessment of some of the organisationally fuzzy groups in their own companies. Operations research departments, departments of organisation, statistical analysis sections, perhaps even personnel departments and other oddball staff groups often contain people whose knowledge and ideas in this realm have not been recognised. Such people provide a potential nucleus for serious major efforts to plan for the inroads of information technology. Perhaps the biggest step managers need to take is an internal, psychological one. In view of the fact that information technology will challenge many long-established practices and doctrines, we will need to rethink some of the attitudes and values which we have taken for granted. In particular, we may have to reappraise our traditional notions about the worth of the individual as opposed to the organisation, and about the mobility right of young men. This kind of inquiry may be painfully difficult, but will be increasingly necessary. That's the end of the article. A quote is provided after the article with no explanation as to its existence. I shall read it to you now. It's taken from Marshall E. Dimmock, A Philosophy of Administration. It's a book that was published by Harper and Brothers in 1958. Among the determinists in administrative theory, and in this category fall most of those who call themselves behaviourists, the notion is widely held that what an individual institution may be able to accomplish is controlled by the general environment in which it operates. I suppose a certain amount of support may be secured for this position by an oversimplified read of biology, as well as of psychology and sociology. But the behaviourists are wrong. They are wrong not because what they assume lacks truth, but because they leave out of consideration the contriving factors of man's intelligence. Or, putting the matter more positively, what we have to assume in administration is that man, being intelligent, is capable of a growing amount of free will, that he can help to determine his environment and not merely be bound by it and conform to it. And if you think that this is an idle notion, how else can you explain American tradition with the self-confidence and daring that our pioneers exhibited, their lusty proclivity to take chances and to experiment, their insolent disregard for convention and for the shibboleths of the old world, which would have tied them to the rule of privilege and the powerful? Do we want at this stage in our national history to turn our backs on all this? The chief virtue that has given us what success as a nation have achieved.